Okay. Well, it's great to be here. I'm sure you've all felt it, a great disturbance in the industry. There's been a lot going on. We have certainly have felt it as well. So we've convened this council to discuss the issue of crafting the perfect game platform. Which platform will be the ultimate power in the universe? So we're going to start with introductions, and then after that we're going to get into it. I just want to give you a chance to just briefly introduce yourself and kind of the angle you're coming from. And just a quick note, if you feel your throat tightening a little bit, that means you're talking too long. So why don't we start down here?
Thanks, Kate. So my name is Tzvi Greenstein. I'm a general manager at Nvidia, and I'm also heading the business development for virtual reality.
I'm Hao Chen. I'm a senior principal engineer with Amazon Lumberyard.
I'm Sinjin Bain, CEO of MaxPlay, and we're focused on sort of next generation game development platforms.
Great. So, where are we right now? What are the current platform capabilities? What do we need to do? I think it'd help before we start talking about creating something better or perfect. What's your assessment of where we are? And what do we need to do to go beyond where we are right now?
You want to go first?
Yeah, a few things. First of all, I think from the device side, we need the device to be more open platform rather than the closed platform that they are today. It should be more like the YouTube rather than the App Store model, because we really need lots and lots of good content. And we think lots of those good content is going to be user-generated. So we really want to lower the barrier for people to create content and share those content, and for users to curate those content. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, is that the platforms really need to be open, not closed. The second thing is for development tools, I think we need to enable, we need to create this perfect synergy between traditional game development tools and workflow with VR. I personally don't think moving development into VR is a great idea, at least for professional developers, because there are so many tools out there that are already mature, lots of expertise. To throw all that away and start fresh in VR doesn't make sense. And how do you replace Photoshop in VR? And how do you replace, Pro Tools for audio? How do you replace Final Cut for video? You can't. So we must find a seamless way of integrating VR workflow with traditional workflow. So that's a challenge in the game development side. And finally, in the game engine side, I think the current engines are not properly architected for VR. If you think about delivering fidelity and performance at a very low latency, the current engines are really not targeted to do that. And few engines can deliver 30 FPS if your display is 4K, because most people use this default rendering. If you move to 8K or more, and if you want to go beyond 60 FPS to 120 FPS to 240 FPS, the current engines really are not designed for that. For that to happen, we need to retarget the engines, and we need to bring the cloud into the mix. We want to move a lot of computation into the cloud. So speaking of the cloud, I think all three things, the end user platform, the development platform, and the engine, the cloud is going to become a very essential piece to all that. So those are the things that come to my mind.
Well, I think Hal's covered it all. So, and I do think that identifying the core capabilities, to Hal's point, we are as tool and technology providers, we're behind the curve in the industry. We're not leveraging the cloud appropriately. We're not leveraging the great hardware that Nvidia is creating appropriately, and other people in the industry. You can see every game engine maker. I don't want to say the word scrambling, but I'll just say scrambling to identify, what do we need to do to get 5 to 10x the runtime performance that we currently have, because that's what's needed, right? And that's not just rendering. That's how do we leverage physics systems? How do we leverage audio engines? How do we leverage scripting engines? There's this morass, there's this whole matrix of technology that needs to be rethought to be able to enable what developers need to deliver great content, to allow content developers to make great content. And then, you know, the other end of it is the whole notion of how do you make content in virtual reality, and how do we fundamentally enable new ways that are more efficient, that create new workflows. We're stuck in 20-year past workflow, and it's a nightmare and it's a disaster in our industry. So I know we're all working on solutions for that. So it's really interesting to look at how each company, whether it's Amazon, Unity, Epic, our company, are sort of looking at these challenges because we're all looking at them.
Just to share an interesting data point with the audience here, just so for those of you who don't know, VR is 7 times more demanding than PC gaming, like with the current platform. PC gaming, you run a game at 30 or 45 frames per second on a 1080 resolution. In VR, you need to render to a much higher resolution at 90 frames per second and at 20 milliseconds. The other big difference is that the VR platform is not that forgiving. 11 milliseconds is your budget. You exceed that, you get motion sick. 20 milliseconds is your budget for latency, head movement to display. You exceed that, you get motion sick. So there is a lot of optimization that need to go in, right? For development is an optimization exercise in the most part. A lot of trade-offs need to be made. And in addition to that, as you know, Hal and Sijin mentioned, there are a few elements that are very critical in VR, which were considered eye candies in non-VR applications, such as physics. The world in VR has to abide to the laws of physics. Everything has to look and feel real. Eye candy in non-VR, critical in VR. Audio processing and so forth. Everything has to fit within 11 milliseconds and 20 milliseconds of latency. And that's a huge, huge challenge that requires a new paradigm.
The only thing I would add is that 11 milliseconds is very unforgiving, but there are plenty of things in the game engine that does not need to update at that frequency. The key is to unlock those frequencies so that the parts that are updated very slowly or can be updated in a latency tolerant way happens somewhere in the cloud. For example, you know, lighting, for example, you know, a lot of global illumination are very, very expensive to compute, but they don't really need to update at even 30 FPS. You know, 10 FPS might be sufficient for a lot of lighting effects. Things like visibility, you know, like having the cloud to compute the visibility of what's visible so that your device, you only have to be dumb about, you know, what to draw and what not to draw.
So it's a new approach for distributed computing, just to
Absolutely, yeah. So you know, cloud is going to be the biggest console, right? So basically, it has everything you need to do those latency tolerant things. There's a lot of R&D that still need to happen to make that integration seamless. But you know, I think that's generally the direction that people should think about it.
I think one other thing just to throw in is, as the technical work that, you know, like Amazon's doing and we're doing, the other thing we have to think about is how do we broaden our reach in our tech stack up into DCC tools like Maya. And the reality is 40% of the cost of a project and the time of a project is actually before you ever get to the game engine, right, and to get to the game editing. And so we as an industry need to rethink how we're reaching up into the content creation and speed up that content, that process as a part of the integrated pipeline, and not have it separate. So there's some really interesting opportunities to help our talent work more efficiently and more creatively.
Totally agree.
So at this point then, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, okay, what we have now is not good enough. I'm pretty clear on that. It's not perfect by any means. You know, we're talking about how can we create a platform that's going to be viable for VR, and whether or not VR is going to be viable, which is kind of the issue I want to get into. So in your opinion, do you think with the limited install base right now, and just explicitly, we're not going to touch on AR because we just don't have time to get into that. So for VR, with the limited install base, do you think this is the right time for developers to jump in? You know, is this something people should be doing, or especially with the limited tools or the limited platforms we have?
You know, I can take that first. I've been following VR for over 10 years, and there's a feeling that it's finally coming together with all the right pieces falling in place. Like, it's never been there. It's not perfect now. It's far from being perfect, but it's coming together. From a GPU perspective, we're able to deliver, I would say, like the magic of presence to people around the world in a power efficient manner and price points that appeal to the mass market. The install base is not big, but it's not that small either. Keep in mind that PSVR is jumping in as well, which is going to definitely help the ecosystem. Speaking of PSVR and taking a step back, I think that the big change for developers at this point, relative to previous generation console, is that they can all develop to a single PC architecture, which allows them to go big and aim really, really high. So it will definitely get there. And from a game developer standpoint, or the application developers, they have a couple of choices, right? They can wait until the install base gets much bigger, 20, 30, 40 million units on PC, or do it now. I think that this is the right time to jump in, just to aim really high, push the envelope, build a name for yourself, and position yourself well for when the industry really takes off.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial because I've been on both ends of both the platform provider like I am now with Amazon Lumberyard, but also been with Bungie for a very long time, so I've been on the AAA game development side. If you're a AAA game studio, you spend $100 million, $200 million on a game, the install base right now is really hard to justify you spending that kind of money on VR platform alone. And so for those companies, they probably are not going to seriously target a VR experiences with a big budget. That being said, I don't think it's wait and see is the right thing to do. The industry has never been the kind of passive. Game developers are very aggressive at pursuing new opportunities, even without profit in sight. So for the big developer, I think what you can do right now is think about ways to combine traditional games with VR as an add-on rather than as exclusive experiences. Some of this most innovation will come from the form that non-VR players and VR players play together in the same play space. These big developers also have a better chance of coming up with really deep, engaging, and differentiating experiences. So this is a time for them to learn and experiment and invest in long-term technology that will eventually pay off. But for mid-sized developers and startups, VR is a great opportunity for you to actually deliver content to the customers at a smaller budget and a much quicker development cycle. And the investment is still pretty strong in that area.
I'm even thinking beyond gaming. With VR, you can introduce so many different use cases. Take social VR as an example, where the first mover can have a huge advantage, as long as you build an application that can really scale from the Gear VR and such all the way to the high end. So I believe that for those app developers, it's very, very important to jump on it first.
Well, I think, so
it will pay off.
To pile onto that, right there, I have never, in the platform transitions that I've been through, which are a few, I've never seen so much focus, so much money coming in from hardware, software platform owners, even cloud owners. It seems like there's a lot more people pushing to make this happen faster. So jumping in and experimenting now as a content developer feels pretty mission critical on a timeline, because we don't understand this medium yet.
Right.
And so you got to jump in and you have to make your mistakes now. I think to your guys' point, you want to limit your exposure, your risk, right? So this is a classic example of fail fast and move on and do it again.
So I think the VR ecosystem need to be a lot healthier than the AAA game ecosystem, because the AAA games right now is dominated by, $200, $300 million franchises. And really there's no market, no investment for people who want to make a game that is $20 million. Mm-hmm. They just wouldn't consider it. All the publishers only consider things 100 million or up. That ecosystem is very unhealthy. What I'm hoping is that VR will be a much healthier ecosystem. At the bottom end will be lots of user-generated content, and the middle end is lots of small developer creating small title budgets. And at the top end is some of these really good titles, good experiences, will scale up to be 100 million, 200 million, 300 million franchises. Mm-hmm. But you got this ecosystem supporting this whole pyramid, rather than this very lopsided ecosystem, which means that in VR we really need to think long term and be patient. That this platform will become better, form factor will be better. There are going to be more content. If we take the approach that this is a gold rush, everybody rushes in, get their gold, I think we might fail. This platform might not exist long term. So I really encourage people to experiment, but really think long term. Invest in the long term things.
Well, do you have any estimates then on when is the tipping point going to get here? When do you think, for those who are reticent to jump into VR as a platform, for example, when do you think that's going to happen? And what is it? I mean, what exactly is that going to look like? I mean, in lieu of that, I mean, should developers just stick with mobile for now? It's like a safe space for VR, doing like Gear VR stuff, or what do you think?
Yeah. First.
I see two categories in the VR market, two distinct categories. One is obviously the mobile. I would call it the cinematic VR, defined by Google Daydream, Gear VR and such. There's probably place for another segment for an all-in-one with an integrated processor. And the other one is the high-end, or what I call the interactive VR, defined by Sony PSVR, HTC, and Oculus, and hopefully many more players will jump in. I believe that both platforms are important. Like if I were a game developer or any application developer beyond gaming, I would make sure that I build an application that can scale, like all the way up from a Gear VR, cinematic VR, and all the way up. In terms of tipping point from an install base standpoint, I believe that the Q4 is a very important quarter in the VR market with introduction of a PSVR, as the content can be easily portable and scalable on a PC. So that could be an interesting tipping point.
I actually don't. I'm very skeptical that mobile VR will become much bigger than we think they are. The reason is that strapping a phone to your face is just socially not cool, and the form factor is inconvenient. And how many people you see, wearing a Gear VR in their head as they walk around, or on on an airplane, how many people are strapping on a Gear VR? And that's the time that you have nothing to do, and yet very few people do that because socially it's just not cool to have this big thing strapped into your head.
Yeah, strapping an HMD to your head is not cool, but that's VR in essence.
I was going to say, that's what it is.
And that's the problem, right? So
you get used to it.
in my mind, that VR has to be a living room experiences, because you're essentially having a console and immerse yourself in a console world. So for that reason, I think that console VR and dedicated PC VR, especially if you can have VR devices that are connected to your PC and console wirelessly, so you don't have to suffer from that tethering problem. I think those are going to be the form factor that matters. What does that mean? That means that maybe the size of the VR market does have a limit. It's much smaller than people think they are. But that doesn't mean that there's not enough room for people to create good content and good experiences. The console market is still a huge market.
I think that's right. You're going to get a piece of content. There's tethered and untethered, right? I'm not separating it between mobile or whatever, but the other thing is, I think, how and what is the content that's going to be really compelling for people in a shared experience.
Right.
Right. So I think when somebody figures out a seminal shared experience that's accessible, and you can both wear your silly goggles, and be next to each other or whatever. I mean, there are going to be things like that change the perception, I think, of what this VR thing is and how people think about putting something on their face. Because I agree, putting something on your face is funny. So, the content, I think, is my point is what's going to drive this and drive the acceptance.
Well, I imagine at some point in our history, they thought it was funny to put on eyeglasses too. Look kind of strange, but maybe we'll get there. We have just a few minutes left. You guys want to take some questions? So do we have any questions out there? Does someone have a microphone?
Or you can just stand up and scream.
There we go.
I know you guys said you didn't want to talk about AR too much, but you guys mentioned how right now is a good time to jump into VR so you learn, make your mistakes. Is that also kind of important so you learn the lessons you need to learn once AR becomes a market? Because VR is kind of something you can slap on top of AR and learn a lot.
Yeah, it's so. In my mind, they're separate animals for many reasons, and they have a lot of disparate technical issues that need to be solved elegantly, and then there are different design challenges that need to be solved in terms of how that goes. So the same, it feels to me like we're going to have the same exercise in a parallel track. So yeah, you're going to need to think about, you may need, you're going to need separate designs, separate ways to think about it. There's going to be separate consumer expectations and experiences. It's the same as handheld versus a console or anybody else, maybe times 10. And yeah, it's gonna take a while. I mean, if you look at what's going on with HoloLens and Magic Leap and kind of how the markets may accept that platform, it may be, even if you think about AR, the opportunities feel like they're going to be maybe 5x of VR for a variety of reasons. And I know we're all game developers sitting in this room. That's our DNA. But the opportunity to make money is going to really be in some interesting, huge verticals that require a lot of the same talents that making a game are. And so, it's really interesting to think about our opportunities as an industry to be the actual center of education, medical, government. I could just go on and name all these verticals, right? And we as an industry actually have the lead position to own those. It's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm super excited about AR. I think AR has the potential to be huge and influence people's lives really and make everybody's lives better. And it has, on the device end, I think AR has a lot better chance of being a small form factor because you don't have to block out the entire field of view. But AR is also challenging. Device is only one part of it. Figure out the right display at the right size with the right power, tether or untether. I think that's only one part of the problem. The other problem in AR that are very challenging is some of the fundamental problems that for AR experiences to work. Like you need to be able to reconstruct the scene in front of you in 3D, so you can place objects in those 3D worlds. And a step from that, you need to be able to recognize objects of what you are looking at, so you can associate with meaningful information and do things with it. And so all those are fundamental problems that are not yet solved, and it would take several years for people to solve those problems. And so, but once we do solve those problems, once the device is there, I have faith that this is actually going to take off as a mainstream thing that is going to explode.
Yeah, I share the same opinion. I'll just say that it's much more difficult to get it right. And the challenges are very different than the challenges in VR. They're more related to form factor, battery life, and talking about socially awkward thing. I have yet to see an AR device in a proper form factor with a battery life that can last the whole day with enough processing power, good optics, and a bunch of other challenges that have been the AR challenges for years.
Even aside from the graphics and audio, just the content experience, if we thought understanding telemetry in mobile gaming and gaming in general was challenging and took a while to understand what you do with all that data. When you think about adding eye tracking telemetry, motion control telemetry in an AR environment to that, and think about the big data that's going to get created, we're going to have some really interesting challenges to understand what we do with all this data that we've never dealt with before to make the experiences better and use those in real time. So there's some big hurdles and opportunities.
Absolutely. So with that, one question, our time is up. So thank you, panelists. And our panel is now complete.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.